Hello everyone, this is Kiryn Dennison in FCS411, Marriage and Family Life Education, and this is my presentation on bias and biases. I want to go over what is a bias, how to define it, how it plays a role when distinguishing stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. Then I want to talk about other roles in biases and how we are all mostly have unconscious biases. I want to mention the different types of biases so we can become more aware of the diversity. And lastly, I'm going to go over how biases affect ourselves and others, and then lastly give tips on how to reduce and overcome biases to improve our way of thinking and actions towards others who are different from us. Okay. So what is a bias? A bias is an attitude, belief, or feeling that results in and helps to justify unfair treatment of a person because of his or her identity. Bias lacks the objectivity or inclination to favor one thing, group, or person over another. It's also an inclination for or against a person, idea, or thing, especially in a way we consider to be unfair. For example, as future family life educators, if we had to give a review on a child's behavior performance and one of them was a cousin, niece, nephew, or even our own child, we are more likely to give a better performance review to the child that we know better. And we'd be known to have biases against the other children because we don't know them and choose to favor the child that we know. These biases tend to influence decisions, opinion, behavior because biases affect about every part of our social lives, whether it's the smallest thing like favoring a family member to something that can be problematic and or bringing harm, like believing one race is more superior than another. And with biases, they can be both negative and positive. But even a positive bias can be restrictive to people or person, and positive biases provide us with the illusion that we are open-minded people when really these positive biases are just the flip side of a negative bias. This goes to show that bias and biases result in unfairness in any circumstances, no matter what we tell ourselves. Next, I wanted to define bias with three factors that share the idea of bias. People often are biased against others outside their own social group by showing stereotypes, which is a belief about the personal attributes of a group of people. For example, like I have here, all blondes are dumb, and then another example would be that all Americans own a gun. And with the picture on the left, it has another example saying people with pink hair are mean. Then the second, there is prejudice, which is a negative attitude towards a group. And my example is girls wanting to try out for our football team. Another is that all women are bad drivers. And again, on the picture on the left, it's I don't like people with pink hair. And lastly, there is discrimination, which is an unequal treatment of a group. For example, not allowing a certain group into a place of business or being dismissed because of your race, age, gender, and then other things. In the past, people used to be more obvious with their bias, but during the 20th century, when it became less socially acceptable to show bias, such things like prejudice, stereotypes, and discrimination became more subtle. Now, today, like in the 21st century more modern. However, with social group categories becoming more complex and diverse, biases may be transforming once again. Next, I want to talk about the unconscious bias, which is a more common type of bias because we don't know that we are being biased. So now, as human beings, we all have biases, but we are not always aware of them. On a conscious level, most of us would say that we don't discriminate, but our hidden brains may say different. Now, a hidden brain is a term that describes a variety of influences that influence us without our awareness. Just because you may possess hidden bias, prejudice, or stereotypes does not mean that your practices are discriminatory. Since people have different experiences, we all develop different biases, whether we are aware or not, or unaware of them. Um, now, whether we are or not aware of our biases, there are different types of bias in groups that we have depending on what we believe. For example, like what I have listed here, there are gender bias, sexual bias, age bias, race and ethnicity bias, disability, dis, disability bias, and weight bias. These all contribute something different, and it's those differences that cause us to have biases. Next, having those types of biases, it's important to know how our biases can affect um, and can impact our ability to research objectively to make the best decisions possible and affect our behavior. As future family life educators, we should be aware of our biases when it comes to our personal and professional lives because our bias can greatly affect our lives and as well as the lives of those around us. Due to that being said, and what we went over before, biases affect our decision making with different factors. And to name a few, biases, which is based on deep rooted and incorrect assumptions about others' abilities. An example is that majority of people tend to underestimate women's performance and overestimates men. Second, there is emotion, which also affects our decision making by processing and creating certain feelings about others. Then there is social pressure, where your influences are being encouraged by people and it also has an effect on you. That's a lot like peer pressure. Then there's information bias, which is a tendency to seek information when it does not affect the act, and more information is not always better because with less information, people can often make more accurate predictions. And lastly, there are the outcomes that come from our decision making, which is if we are not aware of our biases, we can bring unfairness to another who can be affected by our decision because it was unfair and because we were unfair. Also, our behaviors can be affected with our biases by our judgment. Then the next one is in-group bias, which is the tendency to favor one's own group. And then there's the ostrich effect, which I found interesting, which is the decision to ignore dangerous or negative information by burying one's head like an ostrich. These behaviors can cause a negative reaction in ourselves and with others that will influence how we see others different than us. Lastly, I have some tips and suggestions to reduce and or overcome our biases, so it does not affect us as family life educators. And more importantly, we can look past the differences in other people, children, groups, and families. First, you can recognize that we are all human beings and that our brains make mistakes. Simply being aware of our biases or unconscious biases can immediately start to reduce our resilience on generalizations or stereotypes. Um, then we can try to be friendlier and act less threatening when interacting with people you perceive as different. We can hang out with people who have better attitude that you can. We can hang out with people who have better attitudes than us. Another one is that we can. Big one is that we can educate ourselves. That we can by exposing ourselves to media that aims to break down prejudice and discrimination and be open-minded. We can expose ourselves to the people and things that make us uncomfortable, like the fear of color that was shown in class. Um, that's a good. That was a good example. And most importantly, we can put ourselves in others' shoes because we don't know what the other person is feeling, and in general, we don't know them. So people and even ourselves should not pass judgment. And with our biases, we shouldn't create a wall which separates us from people that we have biases towards. But we should encourage diversity in everyone. And that's the end. So thank you for your time and hope you enjoyed my presentation. Um, have a good day and good luck with the rest of the semester.